Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're tackling the philosophy of religion.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, it's a big one, right?
Yeah, it is a huge topic.
We've got some awesome excerpts to work with today.
Yeah.
We're looking at the Oxford Handbook of Philosophy of Religion.
Very cool.
So we're going to be talking about everything from like, what is God?
Yeah.
How do we know if God exists?
Yeah.
To like the problem of evil
Yes.
and how religion ties into things like morality and even personal identity.
And even what some other, non-Western traditions have to say about all this stuff. So
I'm excited. This is one of those topics that just like, it makes my brain hurt in a good way.
it's so good.
Okay, so to kick things off, let's talk about God's freedom.
Okay.
So if God is supposed to be, all-powerful and all-knowing,
Right.
could God have chosen to create like a bad world?
That's a big question.
Or was God somehow obligated to create the best possible world?
Like had to.
Yeah, like was there no other option?
Right, right. Well, this is where this idea of aseity comes in, which is God's absolute independence.
Aseity.
It's a mouthful.
Okay, break that down for me.
Yeah, so basically, think of it like this.
Mm.
God is completely free from any outside influence.
Okay.
God just exists on God's own.
Hmm.
Nothing is like pushing God around or making God do anything.
Okay, so God's totally self-sufficient.
Totally. So that means that anything God does, like creating the world,
Uh-huh.
it comes totally from within God, not from any kind of external pressure.
Okay, that makes sense. But then wouldn't that mean that God is still kind of limited by God's own nature?
Oh, that's a good point.
Like, if God's actions are just like a natural outflow of who God is,
Uh-huh.
then doesn't that mean God can only do things that are, like, in line with God's own being?
Right. Yeah.
It seems like we're saying God is free, but only free to be God. You know what I mean?
It is a tricky paradox, right? Like how free is free?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, one way to think about it is this.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe for God, understanding and will, like those two things, they're not actually separate things. They're like different aspects of the same divine essence.
So it's not like God sitting there thinking, should I create a good world or a bad world?
Right.
It's more like God's very being just naturally expresses itself in creation.
Exactly. It's like for God, creating is just this natural overflowing of God's own goodness and perfection.
Okay, that's starting to make more sense.
Yeah.
So it's not about God being forced to create the best possible world.
Mhm.
It's more like the best possible world just naturally flows from who God is.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, like, what does best possible world even mean?
Right.
When you're talking about a being who can imagine
Oh my gosh, yes.
infinite possibilities.
That's mind-blowing.
It really is.
Like, what even are the options when you have unlimited imagination? Okay, I need to shift gears for a second. Let's talk about the Mimamsa school of thought.
Oh, cool.
I was reading about them, and they have this really unique way of understanding the divine.
Yeah, it's fascinating. They focus a lot on the Veda, which are their ancient scriptures,
Okay.
and they see these texts as eternal and authorless, like they just exist outside of time.
Wait, authorless? So they're saying no human wrote them?
Exactly. They believe the Veda is self-existent. It's like this pure, unadulterated truth that's always been there.
Wow, that's a really different concept. So for them, the scriptures themselves are kind of like divine.
Yeah. They have this idea that sound itself, especially in the form of the Veda, is divinely inspired. Like the words themselves hold a special kind of power and truth.
It's like their God is a library.
Yeah, it's a fascinating way to think about it. And they even connect this to the whole that than which a greater cannot be thought idea.
Oh, right. We usually associate that with the concept of God, right?
Yeah, but the Mimamsa folks are saying, hold on a second. What if the ultimate reality isn't a being, but a text?
Okay, my brain is officially bending. So they're saying that the most perfect thing imaginable is a perfect eternal book of knowledge.
Yeah, it's a pretty radical idea. They're challenging our assumptions about what the ultimate reality could be.
Okay, I need a minute to process that one. Let's move on to another school of thought that I hear spun off from those Mimamsa ideas, the Advaita Vedanta school.
Yes, the Advaita Vedanta school takes that Mimamsa seed and plants it in a completely different garden.
Okay, tell me more. What's their take?
They talk about Brahman, which is the ultimate reality for them. But here's the kicker. They say that Brahman is completely non-dual.
Non-dual, what does that even mean?
It means there's no separation, no duality. It's just pure oneness, all-encompassing. Everything that exists is part of that one reality.
So it's not like a separate God up in the heavens looking down on us. It's more like everything is God.
Exactly. It's like the fabric of reality itself is divine. And it's interesting how these two schools connect. early Mimamsa thinkers actually used the term Brahman to refer to the ultimate reality represented by that eternal sound of the Veda.
So, in a way, they were already hinting at this idea of a non-dual, all-encompassing reality.
In a way, yeah. They laid the groundwork for the Advaita Vedanta folks to really run with this concept.
Mind-blowing.
Okay.
Okay, we've covered a lot of abstract stuff. Let's get into something a bit heavier now.
Okay. What are you thinking?
The problem of evil.
Mm-hmm.
If God is all-powerful and all-good, how can we explain all the suffering in the world?
Ah, yes. The age-old question. It really challenges our understanding of God, doesn't it?
It does. It feels like something has to give,
Right, like if God is all-powerful, God could stop suffering.
Exactly.
And if God is all good, God would want to stop suffering. So what's going on?
Right. So is God not all-powerful? Or maybe not all good. I mean, those are the traditional attributes of God.
Yeah, and this is where theologians and philosophers have come up with all sorts of explanations, which are called theodicies.
Theodicies.
Yeah, basically, they're attempts to reconcile the existence of evil with the idea of a good and powerful God.
So they're trying to explain how God can be good and all-powerful, even though there's so much suffering in the world.
Exactly. Some suggest that evil might be necessary for some greater good that we just can't comprehend.
Okay, so it's part of a bigger plan that we just don't see.
Yeah, like maybe suffering is somehow necessary for soul-making or spiritual growth. Others argue that God might allow evil to exist as a test of our faith.
Okay, so it's like a cosmic trial by fire.
Hmm.
I don't know, those explanations always feel a bit unsatisfying.
Yeah, like they don't quite capture the weight of suffering, do they?
No, not at all.
And John Stuart Mill, he basically called theodicies just fancy excuses for horrific events.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
It's hard to reconcile those explanations with the sheer amount of pain and suffering in the world.
Absolutely. And then you add in the idea of God's omniscience, that God knows everything.
Oh, yeah. That makes it even trickier, right?
It really does. Because if God knows everything, that means God knows about all the suffering, past, present, and future.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't God prevent it if God could?
It's like watching a terrible movie and knowing the tragic ending, but choosing not to change the channel.
Exactly. It's a tough one to wrap your head around.
Okay, I need a break from all that heaviness.
Yeah.
Let's talk about something a bit more strategic.
Strategic.
Yeah, like Pascal's wager. Have you ever thought about belief as a kind of bet?
Oh, Pascal's wager. Classic. Yeah, it's a very different approach to belief, isn't it?
It is. It's not about
Yeah.
proving God's existence. It's about making the most prudent choice.
Yeah, like hedging your bets, right?
Exactly. It's like saying, okay, if I believe in God and God exists, awesome, eternal bliss.
Right.
But if I don't believe in God exists, well, things can get pretty fiery, right?
Yeah, not so good. But if God doesn't exist either way, then it doesn't really matter what you believe.
Right. So you might as well believe, just in case.
Yeah, that's the logic. The swamping property is what they call it. Like that infinite potential reward of believing, it outweighs any finite cost of being wrong.
So even if the odds of God existing are super slim, that infinite reward just blows everything else out of the water.
Exactly. It's a decision under uncertainty, just like many other choices we make in life.
And what's interesting is that Pascal wasn't just focused on the afterlife. He also talked about the benefits of belief in this life.
Oh, right. Like
Yeah.
finding meaning and purpose and community.
Exactly. So even if God doesn't exist, believing might still lead to a more fulfilling life.
Yeah, he was making that argument too. Of course, Pascal's wager has its critics.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah. They say it's too simplistic, that it reduces faith to just this calculated bet.
Yeah, I get that. Faith is way more complex than just playing the odds.
Right. Exactly. It's about personal experience and a deep connection to something bigger than yourself.
Right. But I still think it's a provocative thought experiment. It forces you to really consider what's at stake.
Oh, absolutely. It raises all sorts of questions about how we make decisions, especially when faced with ultimate unknowns.
Okay, before we wrap up this first part of our deep dive, I want to touch on one more biggie. The relationship between religion and morality.
Oh, good one. That's a whole can of worms.
It is. So can we be good without God? Or does morality require a religious foundation?
Yeah, that's a question that's been debated for centuries.
It has. And I don't know if there's an easy answer, but what are some of the arguments that people make?
Well, some folks argue that without a divine lawgiver, like without God saying this is right, this is wrong, there can't be any objective moral truths.
So without God, it's all just personal preference, like I like chocolate, you like vanilla, and there's no real right or wrong.
That's the argument, yeah.
Yeah.
That morality needs religion to tell us what's right and wrong, to motivate us to be good,
Right.
and to offer hope for some kind of ultimate justice.
Because if there's no God to judge us, then what's the point of being good?
Right. But then on the other hand, you have folks who argue that we can ground morality in things like human reason and empathy and our natural desire for well-being.
So even if there isn't a God, we can still figure out what's right and wrong based on our own understanding of the world and our place in it.
Exactly. Like, think about the golden rule. Treat others as you want to be treated. It's a pretty universal moral principle, isn't it?
It is. And you don't need a specific religion to understand that, right? It's just about basic human decency.
Right. And there are whole secular ethical systems out there that emphasize human dignity and compassion and building a just society.
So it seems like there are strong arguments on both sides.
There really are, and it's a question that continues to challenge us to think deeply about the foundations of morality.
Well, we've certainly covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive. I'm already feeling my brain getting a workout.
Me too. We've explored some mind-bending ideas about the nature of God,
Yeah.
the problem of evil, Pascal's wager, and the connection between religion and morality. It's a lot to take in.
It is. But it's so fascinating, isn't it? It makes you realize how much there is to ponder about these big questions.
Absolutely. And there's so much more to explore.
I can't wait.
We're just getting started. You know, we were just talking about whether you need religion to be good. But there's this other idea about how God's own actions are motivated.
Oh, okay.
So there's this thing called the DM theory.
DM theory.
Yeah, it's basically a different way of looking at God's commands.
Okay.
It challenges this old idea of divine command theory, which basically says that whatever God commands is automatically good just because God said so.
Oh, I've heard of that. But it always seemed a bit circular to me, like it's good because God said so, and God said so because it's good.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, where's the real foundation for morality there?
Right.
So the DM theory tries to ground God's actions in something more fundamental,
Which is?
love.
Oh, okay.
It's this idea that God's commands, all the rules and stuff,
Uh-huh.
they're actually rooted in God's love for humanity and God's desire for our well-being.
So it's not just about blind obedience to some cosmic rule book.
No, not at all.
It's about understanding the love behind the rules.
Exactly. It's like those rules are an expression of God's love, not just arbitrary commands.
That makes a lot more sense. So even God's actions are motivated by something deeper, something more universal.
Yeah, it connects God's will to this idea of goodness that's not just based on power or authority.
That's really interesting. It gives a whole new layer to how we understand God's actions in the world.
Right. It's not just about following the rules because God said so, but because those rules are meant to lead us towards what's truly good.
Okay, my brain is ready for another challenge.
Yeah.
Let's talk about proofs for God's existence.
All right. Which one are you thinking of?
Let's tackle the argument from perfection.
Oh, the perfection argument.
Have you ever heard of the idea of almost gods?
Almost gods. Now that's a new one.
Right. So it's like this thought experiment that philosophers use to test out those arguments for God's existence.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So imagine a being that's super powerful, practically invincible, but not perfectly good.
Okay, so not exactly God, but close.
Yeah, like a demigod, or maybe think of like Zod from Superman.
Oh, yeah, Zod.
Yeah,
Powerful, but definitely not a good guy.
right. He's got the power, but not the morality.
So how does this relate to the proofs for God's existence?
Well, some of those arguments, this modal argument,
Right, yeah.
they basically say that if it's even possible that God exists, then God must exist.
Okay.
But if those arguments could also accidentally prove that Zod exists, well, that would be a problem, wouldn't it?
Yeah, because we know Zod is a fictional character, and definitely not the God most people have in mind.
Exactly. So the idea is to use these almost gods as a test case.
Okay.
If the argument can't tell the difference between God and a powerful but not so good being, then it's probably not a very strong argument.
That's a clever way to put it. So are you saying these almost gods could break the perfection argument?
Well, that's what some philosophers worry about. Think about it. Zod is a possible being,
Right.
and he's incredibly powerful.
True.
So he might fit the criteria of that than which a greater cannot be thought, at least in terms of power.
Oh, I see the problem. He ticks some of the boxes, but not all of them.
Right. So how do you make sure you're really talking about God and not some cosmic supervillain?
Well, that's where philosophers get really picky about their definitions.
Okay.
They might say, look, God's perfection isn't just about raw power.
Uh-huh.
It also includes perfect goodness, which Zod is definitely lacking.
So you got to build that morality into the definition of God from the very beginning.
Exactly. Otherwise, you might accidentally prove the existence of something that's not quite what you were aiming for.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to another classic argument, the cosmological argument,
The cosmological
the
argument.
one that's all about cause and effect.
Oh, yeah. The first cause argument, right?
Exactly. It starts with the idea that, well, the universe exists,
Obviously.
and everything that exists has to have a cause, right?
Yeah, that's the basic premise.
So what caused the universe?
Right. It couldn't have just popped into existence out of nothing.
So something had to set it in motion,
That's the argument.
but couldn't that cause just be some other natural phenomenon?
That's one of the challenges this argument has to deal with.
Okay.
It has to show that the ultimate cause can't be something that also has a cause.
So they have to prove that there's this, like, ultimate first cause.
Right. A being that exists on its own without needing anything else to get it going.
And that ultimate first cause is God.
That's the conclusion they're aiming for.
It's like that saying, what caused the first domino to fall? Eventually, you have to get back to the domino that started it all.
Exactly.
But even if you prove that there's an ultimate first cause, doesn't mean that that cause is automatically the God of traditional religion.
That's the tricky part. You might have proven something ultimate exists, but you haven't necessarily proven that it's the God who's all-knowing, all-loving, and all that.
So there's a gap there between proving an ultimate cause and proving that cause is the God most people believe in.
Right. There's still a lot of work to do to fill in those details.
Okay, my head is officially spinning from all these arguments. It's like a giant philosophical puzzle.
And that's part of what makes it so fascinating,
Yeah.
right?
It is. Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about something a little more personal. Religion and personal identity.
Oh, interesting. How are you thinking about that?
Well, let me ask you this. Does your continued existence depend on having the same body throughout your life?
Ooh, that's a deep one. It makes you think about what it really means to be you.
Right. Like, I know my body is a part of me, but I also feel like there's more to it than that.
Exactly. Like, what about your thoughts, your memories, your experiences? Do those contribute to your sense of self?
Yeah. And this is where religion comes in, right?
Yeah.
Many religious beliefs deal with what happens after we die.
Right, the afterlife.
Yeah. So if some part of us survives death, what exactly is it? Our soul, our consciousness. Is it tied to our physical body?
Those are the big questions, aren't they? It really gets to the heart of what we believe about the nature of the self.
Right. And it gets even trickier when you think about things like bodily resurrection.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole other layer.
If we're getting new bodies in the afterlife, then how do we even remain ourselves?
It really stretches your imagination, and different religious traditions offer different answers, you know?
Oh yeah, fill me in on some of those.
Well, some believe in the resurrection of the body, like our physical form will be restored in some way.
Right.
Others focus on the immortality of the soul, like it's our non-physical essence that lives on.
So there are lots of different interpretations out there.
There really are. Like Thomas Aquinas had this interesting idea.
Aquinas.
Yeah, the philosopher. He had this idea of a subsisting soul.
Subsisting soul, what's that all about?
So Aquinas believed that the soul could exist apart from the body after death,
Okay.
but it's not fully a person until it's reunited with the body in the resurrection.
So like the soul is hanging out, waiting for its body to catch up.
Yeah, it's in this in-between state.
Interesting. And what's it doing during all that waiting?
Well, Aquinas believed that even in this disembodied state, the soul could still experience God.
Oh.
Like it could have this beatific vision, a state of pure joy and union with the divine.
So even though it's not a full person yet, it's still having this amazing spiritual experience.
Right. But Aquinas was really adamant that the body is an essential part of a human being.
Why is the body so important?
He had this whole theory about form and matter.
Form and matter.
Yeah. So the soul is like the form of the body.
Okay.
And the body is the matter. Like the form is the blueprint or the essence of something. And the matter is the physical stuff it's made of.
So the soul is like the essence of a person.
Yeah.
And the body is like the physical container for that essence.
You got it. And Aquinas believed you need both for a complete human being.
So the soul can exist separately for a while, but it's not fully realized as a person until it gets his body back.
Exactly. That's why the resurrection was so important for him. It's about the restoration of the whole person, body and soul, together again.
Okay, that makes sense. But it also raises some questions like, What about people whose bodies have been, completely destroyed?
Oh, yeah, like cremated or lost at sea.
Exactly. Does that mean no resurrection for them?
That's a question that's puzzled theologians for a long time, and they've come up with some interesting answers.
Like what?
Well, some argue that God, being all-powerful, can just recreate the body from scratch.
Even if there's no physical matter left.
Yeah, like God can just will it into being.
So it's like a cosmic 3D printing job.
Huh. It's kind of like that.
But what if someone's organs have been donated and are now part of other people's bodies? Whose body gets resurrected then?
That's the problem of overlapping bodies, and it's a real head-scratcher.
It is. Does the person get split up somehow?
Some theologians have suggested that God might create a sort of composite body.
Composite body.
Yeah, like drawing elements from all the bodies that the person's matter has been part of.
Wow, so it's like a Frankenstein's monster of resurrection.
Huh. It's an interesting image, isn't it? Others have said that God might choose one body to prioritize, maybe based on some unknown criteria.
So there are different ways to approach this puzzle.
Lots of different interpretations out there. It's one of those mysteries that we might not fully understand until, well, the afterlife.
That's true. This whole discussion has really made me think about the relationship between the physical and the spiritual.
Me too. It's one of those enduring questions that keeps us pondering the mysteries of existence.
And speaking of mysteries, let's talk about the relationship between science and faith.
Oh, that's a big one. Always a hot topic.
It is.
Yeah.
Are they destined to be enemies? Or can they coexist peacefully?
Yeah, it's a relationship that's often marked by misunderstanding and sometimes even outright conflict.
Yeah, I feel like I've heard people say that science and religion are just like ships passing in the night.
Oh, yeah, the non-overlapping magisteria idea.
Right, like they're each dealing with different domains of knowledge, so there shouldn't be any conflict.
That's the isolationist view, and it has a certain appeal.
Right. Science sticks to the facts, the observable world,
Uh-huh.
and religion deals with meaning, values, the spiritual realm.
Yeah, but the problem is those two realms aren't always so neatly separated.
True, we live in one reality, right? So there's bound to be some overlap.
Exactly. Think about how people interpret scientific discoveries, like the Big Bang Theory.
Oh yeah. Some people see it as evidence for a creator, while others see it as a purely natural process.
Right. It shows how our pre-existing beliefs can shape how we understand scientific findings.
It's like we're all wearing these invisible glasses that filter how we see the world.
That's a great analogy. So even if science and religion have different methods and focus on different aspects of reality,
Yeah.
they still operate within the same universe, and they can definitely influence each other.
Okay, so if the isolationist view isn't quite right, what are the alternatives? Do we have to choose between science and faith?
Well, some folks advocate for a more symbiotic relationship between science and religion.
Symbiotic, I like that.
It suggests that they can actually complement and enrich each other.
Okay, so they can work together. How so?
Well, science can give us this incredible knowledge about the physical world, how things work.
Yeah.
But religion can grapple with those big existential questions like, what's the meaning of life? Or why are we here?
So it's like using different tools for different tasks.
Exactly. You wouldn't
Yeah.
use a hammer to tighten a screw. Right.
You need the right tool for the job.
And in a way, science and religion are like different tools for understanding different aspects of reality.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
Okay, what about this idea of methodological naturalism? How does that fit into this whole discussion?
So methodological naturalism is basically a guiding principle for scientific inquiry.
Okay.
It says that when scientists are doing science, they should stick to natural explanations.
So no supernatural stuff.
Right. No God, no miracles, just natural causes and processes.
But I can see how that might cause problems for religious believers, especially those who believe in a God who acts in the world.
Yeah, it's definitely a point of tension.
Because if you rule out the supernatural from the start, doesn't that mean you're also ruling out God?
That's a common criticism, but defenders of methodological naturalism would say that it's not about denying God's existence. It's about setting boundaries for what counts as a scientific explanation.
So it's like saying, we're not saying God doesn't exist, we're just saying that science has its own methods and its own domain of inquiry.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that science has been incredibly successful in explaining the natural world by sticking to natural explanations.
So it's not about ruling out other possibilities, it's just about staying focused on what science does best.
Right, and you can still hold religious beliefs about God's actions while also accepting that science operates within this framework of methodological naturalism.
So it's not an either situation.
No, it's more about recognizing the different ways that we approach understanding reality.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, before we wrap things up, I want to talk about one more biggie. The problem of miracles.
Miracles. The ultimate clash between science and religion, some might say.
They seem to be right at the heart of this tension, don't they?
Yeah, because miracles, by their very nature, challenge the scientific worldview.
Right. Science deals with natural laws, and miracles seem to break those laws.
Exactly. And that's why they're so central to many religious traditions.
Okay, before we get too deep, let's define our terms.
Let's.
What exactly is a miracle?
Good question. It's not just any unusual or improbable event.
Okay, so winning the lottery isn't a miracle.
Right. It's statistically improbable, but there's still a natural explanation for how it happened.
So a miracle has to have a supernatural cause, something that transcends the natural order.
Exactly. It's an event that seems to defy the laws of nature as we understand them.
Like parting the Red Sea or walking on water.
Yeah, those are the classic examples, things that just shouldn't be possible according to our scientific understanding of the world.
So how do miracles fit into a worldview where natural laws are seen as constant and universal?
That's the big question, isn't it? And it's where things get really tricky.
Because if we accept that the laws of nature are unbreakable, then how can miracles even happen?
Right. It seems like a contradiction.
It does. So how do religious believers reconcile these two seemingly conflicting ideas?
Well, they often argue that God, as the creator of the universe, is not bound by the laws of nature in the same way that we are.
So God can bend the rules.
Yeah, like God can suspend or override those laws in specific instances to accomplish a particular purpose.
But then how do we know if something is truly a miracle or just some natural phenomenon that we haven't figured out yet?
That's a great question, and it's where the debate often hits a wall.
Because just because we don't understand something doesn't automatically make it a miracle.
Exactly. There might be a perfectly natural explanation that we just haven't discovered yet.
So it comes down to a matter of interpretation and worldview.
It really does. Do we believe in a universe where supernatural interventions are possible, or do we think the natural world is all there is?
Okay, speaking of skepticism about miracles, we can't forget David Hume.
Ah, yes, the famous skeptic.
He was pretty adamant that miracles don't happen, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. Hume argued that it's always more rational to believe that a reported miracle is a mistake, a hoax, or a misinterpretation.
Than to believe that a miracle actually occurred.
Exactly. He basically said we should be incredibly skeptical of any claims of miracles.
So even if someone says they saw something miraculous, Hume would say, hold on, let's pump the brakes a bit.
He would. Hume was very suspicious of human testimony, especially when it came to extraordinary claims.
So he thought people were more likely to be mistaken or lying than to have actually witnessed a miracle.
Yeah, he argued that our everyday experience confirms the regularity of natural laws.
Right. Water doesn't just turn into wine on a regular basis.
Exactly. So for Hume, the weight of evidence was always against the occurrence of miracles.
Okay, so Hume sets a pretty high bar for believing in miracles.
He does. He really challenges us to think critically about the evidence and to be wary of extraordinary claims.
Okay, one last question before we wrap things up.
Go for it.
We've talked about the challenges and skepticism surrounding miracles, but I'm also curious about their purpose.
Oh, that's a good question. Like, why are miracles so important in religious belief?
Exactly. What role do they play?
Well, one of the main roles of miracles is to serve as signs of God's power and presence in the world.
So they're like these dramatic displays of divine intervention.
Yeah, like a way for God to break through into our ordinary reality and show that something extraordinary is happening.
And they can also serve as evidence for a particular religious claim, right?
Exactly. Like the miracles attributed to Jesus in the Bible are often seen as proof of his divinity.
It's like saying, look, this guy can do things that no ordinary human can do, so he must be something special.
Right. Miracles can be used to validate a prophet or a message, to show that they have divine backing.
So miracles can be pretty powerful tools for shaping religious belief.
They can. And they can also have a more personal impact on individuals.
How so?
Well, they can provide comfort, hope, even physical healing.
So they can be a source of strength and inspiration for people.
Absolutely. Miracles offer this glimpse into the realm of the extraordinary, the possibility that something beyond our comprehension is at work in the world.
Wow, we've covered so much ground in this deep dive. We talked about different concepts of God, the problem of evil, the relationship between science and faith, personal identity, the afterlife. Miracles. It's been a whirlwind tour of the philosophy of religion.
It really has, and we've just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore.
That's true. But I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about.
I hope so. These are questions that have fascinated people for centuries, and they continue to challenge us to grapple with the big mysteries of existence.
Well, that wraps up another deep dive. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the philosophy of religion.
It's been a pleasure.
Remember to subscribe to the deep dive for more thought-provoking discussions.
And keep those brains working.
Until next time.